So we have Patom. Patom Lembong needs no introduction. He has been the chairman of BKPM, that he is the former Minister of Trade. And Patom has been with the government for many years. And we are very grateful to have him here today. I don't know if all of you remember, but Patom Lembong has been a supporter of the Indonesia Economic Forum from the very early days. In fact, Shoaib and me, we just talked about it today, that this being our 10th year, of the Indonesia Economic Forum, it's great to have Patom back. Every year he comes to the forum and he shares a lot of insights with us. As you know, being a forum of thought leaders and opinion makers, we value all our key speakers. You had Pa Gita Wiryaman this morning, you had Shinta Kamdani, and you had several other speakers, Sandiaga Uno. Economic Forum wouldn't be what it is without, our foundational speakers, and Patom is one of them. So a big welcome for Patom. Yes. We are going to be on topic. We are talking about aligning skills with the jobs of the future, but I'd like to give you some background. Patom actually is now on the campaign team of one of the candidates. It is Pa Anies Baswedan and Pa Muhaimin. That's the team AMIN, that's the camp. Though we are not actually talking politics, we are actually talking more about the view of how Patom and his team has looked at, especially in lines of how skills will align to future jobs and what could be the policies from the campaign team, because they are fresh off the design board. And I wouldn't say it's fresh off, because I think they've been, this is one group that has been in planning and in preparation for the longest among all the other parties that are there. So they have a blueprint, they have a framework, and if Tom could share some of his thoughts and ideas on that, we would have a lot of insights on what could be coming up in front of us from 2024 onwards. So Patom, over to you. Maybe we could have a bit of a fireside chat here, but let's listen to an opening from you on the whole topic of what do you think are the main challenges as Indonesia prepares itself for the upcoming economy, which is a digitalized economy. Therefore, the numbers that we've been talking about is 170 billion value that needs to be achieved, which is an 18-fold increase. And that's not going to happen by accident unless we actually have human resources within Indonesia, not just in the big cities, but right up to the regional levels. So how do you think that such kind of a massive operation in order to skill up the nation can be undertaken?
Thank you, Sahin. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. So thank you for this opportunity. It's always a highlight for me every year. And I know it's usually towards the end of the year. So we're wrapping up the year and looking ahead to the year ahead, right? But I think I want to start by answering the previous question from Samir of AWS. Maybe I'm biased because, I worked so hard to deregulate our data localization laws to enable AWS to come in with a multi-billion-dollar investment. And after that, I think Microsoft followed suit and so on, right? So this is the cloud and data is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. But where it relates to upskilling, I think digitalizing training content, like digitalizing tutorials and quizzes and examples or case studies and lessons, right? And putting them on the cloud, making them available to people on mobile, right? I think that's got to be a huge part of the future, right? All the more so because it's becoming more and more clear that one of the biggest killer app, as they say, one of the biggest, blockbuster applications for generative AI, ChatGPT-like, large language models, will be teaching and training. Yeah. So generative AI will be extremely good at testing you, at examining you, like through quizzes, that it auto-generates, right? Assessing your progress as a student, as a trainee, and then on the fly, generating hyper-customized content for just you, drawing on very large data sets of educational content. Yeah, so thank God all the big cloud players are now here, from AWS to Microsoft to Google, because from what I understand, AI will maybe double or triple or even quadruple data center demand, right? Because like in contrast to a regular web search, an AI query takes 3 to 5 times the computing power and maybe 3 to 5 times the energy requirement, as well for powering those data centers, right? But just like it's expected that AI will give each of us like an omniscient personal assistant, like a turbocharged Alexa or a turbocharged Siri, we can expect that AI will give each worker, each professional, a turbocharged instructor, a turbocharged teacher. And so it's going to transform vocational training, it's going to transform lifelong learning, it's going to transform eventually education itself, right? There's a group of us within the Anies Muhaimin campaign team that is very focused on all the policies that would support this, from deregulating data localization requirements to freeing, content to be accessible, right, to AI startups or to aggregators of content, right? Content banks, content libraries, right? Intellectual property issues around this content. But yeah, to take a step back and apply it a bit more broadly, right? And now pivot to your question, right? Which is the key challenges for solving not only unemployment, but much, much more so underemployment, which Samir also very correctly pointed out. Actually, in this country, we don't so much have an unemployment problem. We have a very, very sizable underemployment problem, right? Like our social safety net is pretty minimal, so everybody has to work just to survive. Right? So everybody sort of is working. We have a pretty healthy work culture, right? Everybody wants to work, but even those who have work often only get 4 to 5 hours of work per week. When they want to be working at least 30, 40, even 50 hours, they want to work as much as they can, but they only get 4 or 5 hours a week as Gojek driver, food delivery driver, as janitor, as whatever, right? I'll start with the classical answers, right? Which of course is the very foundational human capital that we have, which is suffering from poor quality public health. Right, so our workers are, number one, not very healthy. And number two, of course, they're profoundly undereducated. Right? So part of our grand strategy is what we call shifting the focus from hardware to software. President Jokowi's 10 years in power has been very focused on infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Highways, 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 airports, seaports, power plants, factories, smelters, right? All hardware. And we want to shift the focus to software, which is healthcare and education, right? And ultimately, the goal, of course, is to have physically healthy, physically strong, mentally healthy, and well-educated workers, right? So I don't think we'll be able to address the higher level issues, lack of skills, lack of, you know, logic, if we don't address public health. We're starting with stunting, you know, in the early stages, but also even now, right? Even now, we have. I'm one of the people who believes that we have a silent diabetes epidemic, right? Several pharmaceutical companies have educated me over the years that for a population of 280 million people, right? I mean, there's only a few thousand at best diabetes specialists, like kidney specialists in the entire country, right? If you lived here for any amount of time, you know that we love our sugary foods and our sugary drinks. You know, everything from the sugary tea to the sugary cakes, you know, to the, our young people are now on bubble tea and mishwe and sugary coffee beverages, right? Several times a day. Thank you, Sakin. That's right. And so actually, I believe we have a silent diabetes epidemic happening as we speak, right? And we're not alone. I believe it's the case also in China. It's potentially also the case in India, across a lot of parts of the Middle East, right? So something that needs to be addressed on the public health side. Education-wise, right? I believe Nadim was a speaker today. Yeah, his earlier session, right? So he may have already addressed this, but from our perspective, the critical layer is sort of after school and before work, right? Actually, it's not that uncommon. I mean, at the risk of sounding a bit glib, right? I got a liberal arts education, right? So when I started my first job at Morgan Stanley, New York, like I had no employable skills whatsoever, none. And basically, you know, the Wall Street firms where I worked, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, they all hire extensively from liberal arts universities like Harvard, my alma mater, right? And they know, like they've got to train all of us from scratch. So, you know, corporate finance, functional accounting, financial modeling, all that, like basically there's training, right? But the difference is, I think we came in with analytical skills, critical thinking, like logic, right? And I want to bring this even more to ground level. Yeah, I'll give you an example. I'm actually a bit obsessed about what I call clumsiness. Yeah, so just try to observe some time when you're eating out at a restaurant. Like how skilled are the waiters or how clumsy, right? Like, you know, when they try to serve you your drink, are they like putting their elbow in front of your face, right? Or when they try to clear your plates and everything, like, does the way they stack those plates onto their tray, does the way they stack the silverware onto those plates and in those glasses and cups, does it all make sense? Like, are they applying some intuitive sense of the principles of physics, right? Or, you know, as soon as they turn around, like, all the silverware spills over their tray and clatters to the floor, right? Or do they accidentally knock over your glass while they're serving your meal? I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you've eaten at a high-class restaurant in Switzerland or in Paris, right? I mean, the difference in service between the waiter there and the waiter here, but even a high-paid, you know, restaurant, that's skill. That's skill level, right? I know that our formal education system is always very focused on, you know, academics, and, you know, my kids either have done, just did, or are doing international baccalaureate. So biology, chemistry, you know, mathematics, all this, right? But I'm very focused on real life kind of I struggle to describe it, frankly. Non-clumsiness. Maybe that's the best I can come up with. It's like non-clumsiness. Like, how can you be skilled, in the sense of not being clumsy, right? And the further out you go, right? Like Jakarta is already quite a developed service sector economy. Bali is already quite developed, but you go out to Labuan Bajo, again, like that clumsiness becomes much, much worse. Like they drop plates in a restaurant, they drop glasses, they spill things, you know. So that, to me, is a big focus. And I think the fastest and best way to address that is through social media-like content, bite-sized content. So I always like to say we now live in the era of the 2-minute Instagram video, right? The 7-minute YouTube video, the 12-minute podcast. Like, so who the hell is going to sit there and watch a 1-hour-long lecture? Like, who the hell is going to sit there, you know, and read a whole book? You know, the joke among the campaign was like, only Anis, only Pa Anis. And I joke, well, probably only Pa Anis and me, you know, the ones in the campaign who are still reading, you know, books cover to cover. And, you know, increasingly, our dopamine receptors are conditioned to want the quick hit, to want the bite-sized content, right? And so I think this type of skill instruction, this type of training is best broken down into 10-minute video segments that people can consume on the go, right? So I think the best model for this actually is, in many ways, Khan Academy. Serialize it, right? I mean, over a whole subject, it might cover 3 or 4 or even 5 hours of content, but it's all serialized into 10-minute, 12-minute segments, and you can always stop in the middle, you know, you can always go back, right? So break it down into bite-sized chunks, because that's what I think you put your finger on it, Samir. That's what our people will have bandwidth for. They're already exhausted working from morning till night, or stressing out over healthcare expenses for family members, or, you know, debts owed to pinjol, you know, to loan sharks, or other, you know, issues. So I think what is realistic for them to consume of upskilling, training, education would be bite-sized content delivered straight to their mobiles in entertaining fashion, and you know, residing on the cloud and dramatically enhanced with generative AI.
Okay, actually, Tom, you know, you touched upon a very interesting topic, which is micro-learning. You just described micro-learning in bite-sized ways of being a tool to educate people in things that are going to bring up their competency. Now, there is a shift in how companies all over the world are looking at educational programs which is run by the academia, which are like 4-year courses and 3-year courses, undergraduate degree, postgraduate degrees. And a lot of large tech companies are setting the way of saying that that doesn't deliver people that we need. And therefore, they need either that to be replaced or be supplemented by micro-learning. So there is an opportunity to insert a lot of content into whatever other programs are in the establishment, because that's reinforcing the program. I know Nalin does this. Orbit Future Academy is doing a lot of that work, embedding a lot of life skills programs into otherwise official content or curriculum which is approved by the government, because it's very difficult to break away from the hold of the academia in the system. But the industry doesn't want that. So that's where the mismatch is. So I hear you about how you're looking at micro-learning as being a way to supplement this. But do you have a view on where formal education is going, or how do you see that balance existing?
Thank you, Sakhin. Actually, one of the biggest sigh of relief that I breathed recently was when I caught a video clip of my candidate, Governor Anis, saying while he was making commitments to improve teacher welfare and raise teacher salaries, right? He said, ladies and gentlemen, please, 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 let us not forget about the private sector teachers. No, please let us not discriminate against private sector, meaning private school teachers. You know, we also have to make sure that they're well compensated, that they're, you know, empowered and have the tools and the wherewithal to be fantastic teachers, not only the teachers who are on the government payroll. Yeah? Now, to give you more context politically, I believe he said this at a Muhammadiyah event. And Muhammadiyah actually runs a lot of schools and many universities, which actually are classified as private sector schools, private sector universities. They're not madrasas, right? They're not Islamic universities. They're private sector schools and private sector universities where the students and the parents pay significant tuition, right? And those schools and universities try to do their best with what they have, right? The point I'm getting at is that one of our larger economic sort of policy strategies and campaign promise is to maximize the involvement of the private sector. And that would extend to the field of education, to the industry of education, right? That would also extend to the healthcare industry, right? So when we say we want to shift the focus from hardware to software, and we say we want to focus on healthcare sector, we want to focus on educational sector, actually it's really important for us to immediately say private sector healthcare and private sector education, because, you know, by necessity, but also by spirit, I think we want to stop trying to fund everything from the state budget. You know? Actually, our shortage of healthcare and our low quality of healthcare is a massive business opportunity for entrepreneurs, for technology providers, for pharmaceutical companies and the like, right? And it's a huge employment opportunity, right? Same with education. Like Muhammadiyah is already very large. But I was recently quite surprised. Like a lot of these private sector schools can charge an arm and a leg, you know, and be quite profitable. But it requires a policy regime that is really, really conducive to private sector healthcare, private sector education. In healthcare, for example, a vibrant private sector health insurance industry, right? Not only always relying on BPJS Health, because I believe there's a gap between the basic, you know, very, very basic BPJS Health, and then sort of in the US we used to call it the Rolls Royce insurance, right? Like, you know, where you pay tons of money and, you know, you get gold-plated coverage, but there's sort of a missing middle there, right? Which actually could be subsidized or underwritten by the government, right? Even though the providers of that health insurance are private sector, right? Can be subsidized or underwritten directly or indirectly, depending on what the laws allow. Same with education. I believe there's a big middle, kind of a big missing middle between the government schools, government paid teachers, the madrasas, right? And then the private schools, which oftentimes can be quite costly, right? But we want to maximize private sector involvement in education and healthcare, right? And we want the private sector to be the engine that's powering the economic growth, right? During the Jokowi era, it's largely been government spending, investment, and just in the last couple of years, thanks to the commodity boom, exports has been driving GDP growth, right? These are starting to be tapped out. Our exports are now declining in line with commodity prices. Our government spending is proving to be inefficient, right? Our input to output ratio has deteriorated hugely over the last, 10 years, especially over the last 5 years. Like we're throwing more and more money into infrastructure, right? And getting less and less productivity out of it. So we have by far the worst input-output ratio of all countries in ASEAN, actually. The famous I-core, right? Input capital to output ratio. I think, Singapore, Malaysia are like 1 or 2, then most other countries are like 3 or 4. We're at 7. That's how ineffective the tens of billions of dollars of capital investment have been in generating growth for the economy, right? So government spending and fixed capital formation investment. So actually, we need to shift the growth engine back to consumption. Now, I like to joke that consumption, there's actually 2 kinds. Consumption with a small c and consumption with a capital C, right? When we hear the word consumption, we think like, oh, let's go shopping. Oh, we're going on holiday, right? Well, that's consumption with a small c. The consumption I'm talking about is consumption with a capital C, as in the formula GDP equals C plus G plus I plus exports minus imports, right? And as I mentioned just now, over the last 10 years, it's been overwhelmingly G and I. I is actually gross fixed capital formation, right? In economic parlance. Now, consumption with the capital C in that formula actually covers sectors like healthcare and education, right? So actually, when people say that China needs to shift, from export and industrialization, industry, right, and infrastructure to consumption, actually it's to healthcare and to education, right, and to entertainment industry, tourism, lifestyle, like all these things. But yeah.
Okay, so you made a good point, and I would summarize that today skilling education has a force multiplier thanks to technology and methodology, and those are the ways that you can do massive scaling up for education, healthcare, and some of the sectors. No, but I would like to ask you a little bit about global talent. We are looking at scaling up our people, and we talked about underemployment, we talked about upskilling. However, the global talent pool in Indonesia is a handful today, but it doesn't have to be so. You're a good example of how you are part of the global talent pool of Indonesia, having worked in so many other places, so many other countries. And we see that with the kind of young generation that's coming through, there's ample opportunity for us to develop global talent, especially with Industry 4.0 having work from anywhere. Tech skills can be done from anywhere. What's your view or a direction that you think Indonesia should take? What's the opportunity ahead of Indonesia, which is not the old paradigm of healthcare people and factory workers and home care workers going to the Middle East, because that used to be the paradigm of manpower planning, right, or manpower preparation for the nation. We're looking at a very different skill sets and the availability of global talent here. How do you see that whole thing emerging?
So, as futuristic as my earlier explanation about, generative AI enhancing training and education, right? I also believe that the next 10 years are going to see dramatic advances in making virtualization significantly more immersive. Yeah. Now, the extreme case of that is the virtual reality goggles, right? But that's pretty extreme, right? I mean, Apple has now jumped in with both feet with their reality or with their vision product with the goggles, right? The VR, AR. But if you think about the progress we've made even until today, right? I mean, 10, 15 years ago, an LED screen of the size behind us would have been prohibitively expensive. Now, like every event we go to has it. And so if, for example, my candidate, Pak Anies, was piping in via Zoom, and he's on this gigantic screen behind us, it's already much more immersive than it used to be, right? And so I think you're going to see a new generation of screens, gadgets, devices, stopping short of the complete, face-hugging goggles that's going to make remote work or remote participation or remote collaboration feel much more immersive. Yeah. So actually, I tried to implement this in my old private equity firm, between our Singapore office and our Jakarta office. Back then, it used to be called a wormhole. Yeah. So back then, high-quality televideo conferencing systems were just becoming affordable, and we started having a lot more what today we would call Zoom meetings. Back then, it was over ISDN lines, or I forgot the protocols, right? Like H.213, or I forgot, 232 or something. It's like these video conferencing protocols, right? But we used to have big screen TVs on both ends, and it's now common to have these Zoom meetings, in these meeting rooms. But what a wormhole is, right? And because we have a open office layout, imagine like one giant TV screen with a teleconference that's just always on both sides, right? So it's almost like you're merging two offices. So, somebody might have just gone to the pantry, get a cup of coffee, walk by. It's like, hey, I see Bob over there in the Jakarta office. And you yell out, hey, Bob, Bob, Bob. And Bob's like, someone's calling him, like, hey, Tom. It's like, you start like standing there with your tumbler and your thermos, and you're just chatting spontaneously because you've just merged the two offices via what back then at least was called a wormhole, right? And so I think online collaboration is absolutely the future, right? And actually, the application of AI in robotics will be tremendous. Like suddenly, so actually I read I think if I remember correctly, a Wall Street Journal article. Like, actually you already have some prototype robots that can be controlled remotely by a human operator to restock store shelves in retail, but it's still pretty clumsy. It's still pretty unwieldy, right? But I believe when this technology becomes AI enhanced, you'll have like glove or never mind glove, like you'll have like image analysis software that can sort of like read your gestures, your fingers, your head movements, your eye movements, right? And seamlessly operate a machine on the other side that translates whatever we're doing. Our body language becomes the machine operating language, right, on the other side. What's ironic, Sachin, is actually, I believe that all this AI and next generation technology will actually, in many respects, reduce the skill required, right? I believe AI will sort of democratize access to technology, because now these systems could become so smart that you engage with them verbally, right? You just talk to them and they talk back to you, right? So you don't have to, know how to enter a login and a password and then navigate through like a sort of menus and then, like type a query, whatever. Like like I think technology will make it accessible, much more accessible to people who are not that highly trained, not that highly skilled.
So we have a couple of quick questions from the floor. Would anybody like to ask a question? Yeah, Nalin, over to you. Can we get a mic there? We'll have two questions, so please, anybody else
Tom,
would like? Yeah.
You were a virtual endorsement for what Orbit Future Academy does. We built, seeing the problem of job readiness, which industry says to graduates are not job ready, we did a nationwide survey. We built an AI-driven product that assesses provides customized, curated, personalized learning paths across 30 competencies, takes the student through it, and ultimately gives them a guaranteed job. Now, and everything is through micro-learning short videos, and it's entertaining. So as you were speaking, I thought somebody should be recording this. I'm going to use this in my pitch. But here's the challenge, and maybe you have some thoughts on helping us. The industry knows what's the problem. We ask the students, they know what's the problem. Everybody has the solution. But what do we do about the university administrative system and regulation to get them out of their delusion and deniability?
So, at the risk of sounding like I'm campaigning, we really
you're allowed to campaign.
the official campaign has started, after all, yesterday. But we really desperately, badly need some leadership from government and from our political leaders. Like, we need leaders who first understand this stuff, and second, actually care, right? I happen to believe that that person is honest, right? Somebody with a real brain, like real masters and real PhDs, from the US as a Fulbright scholar. And he's got the desire and the political courage, right, to basically take on, well, we call it vested interests, but also inertia. Maybe, Nalin, what you're referring to in many cases is just inertia, right? It's the way we've always been doing things. So, change is always hard, right? Plus, he's got the charisma and the communication skill, right, to be a great communicator, right, to explain how this will make even them better off, in the near future. But as many of you know, I've been an investment banker much of my life. That means I'm a lifelong deal maker. And so the question is, what deal can we cut with the inertia, with the sticks in the mud, with the people who are holding back change, right? You've got to give them new toys. You've got to give them new, shiny new toys to play with. You've got to give them new income-generating opportunities. You've got to give them new ways how this can benefit them, materially, financially, right? Lifestyle-wise, and political leaders and policymakers have to have the communication skills to convey, to persuade them, to show, to demonstrate, to showcase, to show them, like, look, this is how this is going to raise your income. This is how it's going to make your life as a professor so much better. This is how it's going to make your life as a trainer so much better, right? And I believe these things do, these technologies, right, these new ways of engaging will lead to more fulfilling careers for professors, for teachers, right? One simple one is, I can't remember offhand the percentage of GDP we spend on R&D. I imagine it's piddling. I imagine it's minuscule. Even you throw in whatever is spent by the corporate sector on R&D, I'm sure it's piddling, right? But collaboration between academia and industry on research and development, right? I mean, look at Silicon Valley and the Stanford, tech sector axis. Look at MIT and the biotech sector, right? Or Harvard Medical School and the pharmaceutical and and medical devices industries, right? And a lot of professors get really rich patenting their inventions, and then there's an ecosystem of venture capitalists and government policies that enable them to monetize that by commercializing these technologies, right? And so, yeah, you can't, tell vested interests to just stop doing what they're doing and give up whatever they're enjoying without replacing it with something else that's better or more exciting and more fruitful.
Do we have one question more? Time more? Okay. Anybody? Samir? Okay, over to you, Samir.
Sorry, like I've already asked one in case if someone else wants to take the opportunity.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The lady over here.
Yeah.
Let's have some gender balance, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I can clearly see there is
here.
a lot of interest.
Yes.
Good afternoon. This question is to both Nalin and yourself, because I'm in the legal sector, and digitalization has been unleashed, for sure. But what has not happened is integration completely, and lack of skill currently with the workers who are actually implementing the system. Now, I have been here since 2006, and I have seen the way the system has transformed since 2006 till 2023. Now, Orbit is into skilling for the future. Now, the issues that we are currently facing is most important, because if we don't address it right now, the current problems that I, as a lawyer, face, I can imagine the others who are in this sector who face this, because it has become hybrid. The system is there, and the issues, those who are handling it at the ministerial level are not able to solve it in-house, and it is outsourced. So it has become an obstacle. Digitalization is one part, but not able to resolve the issues timely is hindering, in my opinion, a lot of licensing issues, operational issues, then therefore foreign investment and business and etc. Would Orbit is looking at skilling the future generation? Would Orbit also consider, I know Orbit is very close to my heart, but is Nalin also team looking at also training the existing workforce so as to expedite, digitalization in a smooth way? So it's to both of you.
So I think as Seema is a lawyer in a law firm, and she works a lot with the current system that's been created to make things much easier. But I think the frustration is in that ability to make use of that system.
I'm sure he's aware of it, and he's nodding it.
Yeah.
We're tiptoeing around the terminologies, and
Yeah.
this is potentially live streamed or recorded, whatever. So, I mean, back to basics, right? Like one of my favorite sayings in policy and politics is from Washington, where they say, personnel is policy. Yeah. So who you put in charge will determine the outcome. When you put a reformist in charge, you're going to see a lot of reform, right? You put a mobster in charge, or somebody with a mafia mindset, you're going to have a mafia in there, right? And that's why leadership is so important. And one of our campaign promises, broadly speaking, is to go back to technocracy, like go back to technocratic governance, like put professionals in charge, like depoliticize policy, right? And I believe Pak Anies has a good track record in doing that during his 5 years as governor of Jakarta. Even I would complain about a certain policy and says, sorry, this is what the consensus of stakeholders has decided. I'll tell you shortly what that is. It's very petty of me. But right now, the government is very closed. It's very tertutup. It's very not open for discussion, for debate, for inputs, right? For public consultation. That's the opposite of the way Pak Anies ran the Jakarta provincial government. That's why he chose as Jakarta's motto, Jakarta, City of Collaboration. And collaboration is just a more exciting term for consultation, taking a consultative approach, right? So all these policies, like the public transport policy, which became an award-winning policy reform, right, is actually from multi-months, multi-stakeholder engagement with academia, business community, international experts, civil society, activists, the like. Eventually, the leader has to come in and decide right? But months and months and months of multi-stakeholder negotiation and debate and narrowing the differences eventually coalesces around some kind of a consensus. And there's a little bit of a gap left, right? Reconcile, that's where a leader comes in, right? Or if the multi-months negotiation debate hits a roadblock, then it's leader's job to break the gridlock, break the logjam so that the debate can continue towards its final destination, right? But my colleague from PKB, one of the big parties in our coalition, also reminded me that we call this open government. So we're really, really committed to open government. And not just public consultation, just to check the box. Just to cross it, oh, we've done it. We invited, we sent the invitation out, like 6 people showed up, it's videotaped, we have a public consultation, tick the box, it's done. We've done the public consultation. No. Like, we want it for real. We want a really real one, yeah. At a practical level in terms of, fixing the mess we have today, I think, it's gonna end up being all about your choice of people. Like who you choose to critical ministries, like who you choose to be the Director General representing you at that ministry. Because a lot of times, ministers are busy with events or, beholden to their political parties, whatever. Actually, the way President Suharto used to run a highly professional bureaucracy, like clockwork, right, was the state secretariat after every cabinet meeting actually the next day convened the secretary generals of all the ministries to socialize with them directly. We not rely on the ministers, but the state secretariat would directly go to the secretary generals. And at one point, I even said to the president, Jokowi, you know something? I think we can pretty much forget about our ministers. Right? I think what we should do is identify 1 or 2 directors general at every ministry who can be a change agent, right? Who can be our proxy. And we just work directly with the director general and their directors, right? Because frankly, a lot of times you've got political appointees at ministers, or you have ministers struggling with the workload or whatever, right? But Pa Anies was lambasted for having a huge delivery unit, like 90 staff in the governor's office, mostly ex-PwC, ex-EY, like Oxford grads, Columbia grads, right? But you need that. You need that to have working level to working level, right? Forget about like president to minister. It needs to be like working level to working level. But what the president does need to have is, he, and we don't have a female candidate, like, so he needs to care and needs to sort of have the intellect and the passion and the communication skills and the political courage, right, to keep pushing, right? Personally, I believe we're now in quite a mess. We're in a huge mess. And, certainly internally, I'm counseling our campaign like to avoid euphoria, even if we win, because there's so many things to clean up and so many things to fix. And we're going to need the best and the brightest. So we'll probably need to be a lot less partisan and welcome talent. You just mentioned global talent, Pak Sachin. Like, even if that talent was on the other side of the campaign, if they're the right person for the job, so be it, right? And of course, they have to be trustworthy. Like, you have to be able to trust them. And they have to be able and willing to operate in an open government atmosphere of shocking transparency, shocking openness, and willingness to be criticized, right? So we've got to do a 180-degree U-turn from the current atmosphere where people are scared to criticize to one where we're upset when you're not criticizing us, when you're not telling us what's wrong, when you're not telling us what's the problem, then we're upset, right? So we need to turn things around in that manner. it's the best I can do in answering your question about the current problems.
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and that's been a very insightful session. I know.